It was truly another amazing weekend at Martinsville Speedway, NASCAR Nextel Cup Championship Playoffs, Round 6. And you won't believe this, not that Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon dominated the day, but that Bill Davis is perhaps going to join the ranks of those selling his team to some rich outsiders. This time, though Bill Davis won't confirm it, he will say that he's listening to a lot of offers, and the word is that Jacques Villeneuve, the man he's hired to drive his cars next year for Toyota, maybe the guy buying into the operation. Might be buying the whole High Point operation. We don't know yet. Bill says at that end of the garage, and he's down there in barely trying to make it into the top 35 in points, that at that end of the garage, everybody has to listen because there's a lot of money out there. He says an awful lot of money, and he's listening to everybody that comes his way. What he does, he isn't saying yet, but it looks like it might happen pretty soon. Bruton Smith, the billionaire himself, says he doesn't understand all these people coming into the sport and why they're doing this thing. He says it doesn't make any bit of economic sense to him, and he's pretty smart because he's been in the sport since the 1960s, and his take on this thing is these guys are pretty crazy. Actually, this is not a very liquid sport. If you want to get out, you just can't sell. Like in the stock market, it's a very illiquid sport, and you can maybe get 10 cents on the dollar if you're lucky. So what does NASCAR think about all these newcomers coming in? That's a good question. I've been trying to find Brian France to ask him that for a couple of weeks now, but he hasn't been at the racetrack apparently, or at least I haven't seen him. And every time I go into the NASCAR trailer to find somebody to ask a question about this, I find it pretty much empty. I'm not sure if they know what's going on, if they're keeping track of what's going on, if they're orchestrating what's going on. I don't really understand the whole situation myself, and a lot of people have the same questions that I do. Another thing we're looking at is the fact that there might be some changes afoot down in Daytona. There's a report, I don't know if I believe it or not, that Jim France may be ready to take a more active role in NASCAR. Now, Brian has been running the show for several years now, but Jim ultimately owns the whole shebang. Now that Bill Jr. is dead, it's Jim's baby, and he can look in the stands, he can see the stands, he can see the tea leaves from the TV ratings, he knows what's going on in the sport. His sports car series is working fairly well. I think he might be ready to make a move into NASCAR and do a little more than just stand around and watch what's going on. And right now we're asking ourselves if it's good or bad that Rick Hendrick is dominating the sport. All 4 of his teams have won races this year. In fact, his teams have won 15 of the year's 32 races. Now, is that good or bad for the sport? And the fact that Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon have turned this year's playoffs into a rout is not very exciting either if you're trying to sell TV ads. Jimmie won here Sunday. Jeff led the most laps, but Jimmie only picked up 15 points on Jeff, and that's for 4.5 hours of work. And with this car tomorrow, that is a lot of work. Gordon says he thinks that even though he finished 3rd in this car, and he's done fairly well in the car tomorrow races, that NASCAR needs to do an awful lot of work before this thing is really ready to run at some intermediate tracks. And we're going to find out Monday at Atlanta just how good this car is on the intermediate tracks. A lot of drivers are a little nervous about that. NASCAR was apparently considering canceling that test because of the Georgia drought. There's been a state of emergency declared in Georgia. Teams have been told not to wash their trucks, not to wash anything, and some of the engine builders are wondering if they'll be even allowed to run their water through the engine blocks because they waste an awful lot of water cooling things down for qualifying runs and attempted practice qualifying runs. The thing that is amazing about Rick Hendrick's run right now is not so much that he's just amazingly consistent, a lot of horsepower, you expect that, but that it's his competition is just falling by the wayside. They're tripping over themselves, they're shooting themselves in the foot, they're making all sorts of mistakes that are not championship caliber mistakes. They've all got themselves in a hole, except for Clint Boyer. He's the one guy that has a chance. He's holding on by his teeth. He lost more ground. He finished 9th at Martinsville. 115 points back with 4 races to go. He really needs to get within 30 points by the time we get to Homestead. So he's got 3 races to cut down about 30 points a race to get back into this thing. I don't know if he can do it or not, but he's the only guy that has a chance. We're also looking at Kyle Petty and some of the other guys and seeing what's going on in the garage area at the far end of the field where they're trying to make the top 35. And there's a lot of debate about the top 35 guaranteed starting spots, whether NASCAR should change that and just go with the top 12 and then let everybody else qualify on speed, because a lot of guys have speed and they can't make the field. Sometimes you can be one of the 10 fastest cars at a track and go home. That's not right, especially since the top 35 rule was designed to protect these multi-million-dollar sponsors. It's not doing a very good job of that, especially if you look at some of the teams like Red Bull, for example, or Michael Waltrip. Kyle Petty and I traded some words on his Trading Paint TV show, and he had a good line I think that we all should pay attention to when we're listening to anybody talking in the NASCAR garage area, reporters as well as drivers and car owners and NASCAR officials. He says, just because I say it doesn't mean I believe it. Now, that's some classic NASCAR advice. And that's the post-race wrap-up from Martinsville, Virginia. Now we're on the road to Atlanta, Georgia. Mike Mulhern for the Winston-Salem Journal and JournalNow.com. Thanks.